Good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome once again to another G20 Global Land Initiative led side event at the 28th Conference of the Parties of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. I am Murali Thumarukudi. I am the director of the G20 Global Land Initiative. Since I'm sitting with a number of mining experts, I think I should start with a safety briefing because I used to work for Shell before I joined the United Nations, and it is drilled into my brain that every time you have guests who are not familiar with the surrounding, you should give them a safety briefing. This is as you know, UAE is a very safe and secure place, but still, if something happens, the exit route is right here. We go out, we actually have the head count, we'll take a head count, then we'll let you all go. So with those comforting thoughts, maybe I'll start the session. So this session is on mining restoration. The G20 Global Land Initiative was established under the Saudi presidency of the G20 in 2020. It had a global ambition of achieving 50% reduction in degraded land by 2040. And that would translate to, at that time, about 1 billion hectares to be restored, equivalent to the size of China. So massive. And there are many other segments. We have agriculture, we have forestry, we have urban degradation, but then we also have mining. In the big scheme of things, the total amount of mining is not that high. If you look at the total amount of all the mining areas, we are probably talking about 10 million hectares of land globally. And if you add all the small size quarrying, then you add another 10 million, but still you have only 20 million. So it doesn't add a lot to the 20 billion we are talking about, 1 billion we are talking about. But mining generally have a legislation which is backing it. Mining generally have an owner of the site, a concession holder at least. And mining also have resources, mining have experts. So the chance that an area degraded by mining will be restored is much higher than another segment, such as a common property. So we have been working with the Society for Ecological Restoration, a number of other actors in the domain of mining restoration, to see how we can accelerate the pace of mining restoration, but also learn best practices. There are many, many, many best practices from around the world. Under the India presidency of the G20, we worked together to come out with a compendium of best practices. The Society for Ecological Restoration came with a guidance on mine restoration, and I'm very delighted to have Rennie, who authored that guidance, here with us. And there are best practices from other mining companies as well. So I'm very delighted that we are able to do, on the backdrop of the G20 session, of the COP, a session on mining restoration. And we have a very distinguished lineup here. So I want to first introduce Mr. Themba Khwanzi, Regional Director, Africa and Australia, Anglo-Americans, PGM Business. Now, Mr. Themba was appointed Regional Director, Africa and Australia, 1st of July 2023, so it's fairly recent. Congratulations. He previously served as the CEO of Bulk Commodities, starting in 2021. Prior to that, he was the CEO of Kumba Iron Ore from 2016 to 2021. So working in Shell, I know he's what we call a high flyer, so he moved through positions very fast. And CEO for Anglo-American's thermal coal business in South Africa, having joined the group in 2014. He is also a non-executive director of Anglo-American's Platinum and Kumba Iron Ore, a man to be friendly with, Platinum. So today he will actually paint us a big picture of the mining industry and how the mining industry see the restoration imperative. Thank you. You could speak from there, you could speak from here. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Murali, and also my fellow panelists. Dr. Renee and Robin as well. And to you, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's a real honor and a privilege to be given this opportunity just to say a few words and give you our perspectives from a mining company perspective. This matter for us is integral to our environmental stewardship and sustainable development. The topic of mine restoration, as Dr. Morley has highlighted. Now, before I get ahead of myself, allow me to also thank our gracious hosts, the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD, for inviting Anglo-American to participate in this important platform. As Dr. Morley has said, I am Themba Mkhwanazi from Anglo-American. And when you look deeply at Anglo-American, you will quickly realize that we are more than just a leading globally diversified mining company with operations worldwide. We are a company with a clear purpose, and that purpose drives everything that we do. And our purpose is to reimagine mining to improve people's lives. Now, this statement of reimagining mining to improve people's lives is more than just the words contained in it. Our purpose compels us to ask questions like, what could mining be in the future? How do we think differently and innovatively about mining and the entire value chain? And so for us, our purpose is more than just the work we do or the profits we make. It is fundamentally about the positive impact that we have on everything and everyone that we touch. And for us, it has never been more apparent that the world needs more mining and not less. And if you ascribe to the mantra, if it's not made, it is mined. So everything around us, if it is not made, it is mined, including our cell phones, as an example. Now, for us, there are three major trends that are driving this. And firstly, we need a rapid acceleration of global climate change mitigation efforts. And this includes deploying low carbon energy and transport technologies, which will underpin an increase in demand for a range of mined products, including copper, nickel, platinum group metals, and iron ore for steel. We only achieve the Paris climate goals with a much larger supply of these critical raw materials. Secondly, when you look at the global population, we expect 2 billion more people over the next 25 years, with an associated pull for higher living standards. So the global south emulating what has been achieved in the global north or OECD countries. Now, people have everyday needs such as homes, energy, infrastructure, appliances, and mobility. And mining products, together with energy and food, will enable economic developments that help lift people out of poverty. And this cannot happen across the developing world without responsibly produced metals and minerals. Thirdly, and also just as importantly, 10 billion people need to eat, and they want to eat better. So we need to produce an altogether different quantum of food by the time we reach 2050. And in fact, on some measures, we need to produce more food over the next 30 years than has been produced to date in human history, and from a shrinking area of available and productive farmland. Now, with those three drivers, there is no doubt that we will need to do a lot more mined metals and minerals, such as copper, nickel, steel, PGMs, and of course, more effective and environmentally friendly fertilizers to support this reality. So the case for mining is thus very clear. we need to do it more sustainably, and the production of the metals and minerals the world needs must be done responsibly. Now, this is not only about what happens during the course of the mine's life, but also about what happens at its end, and hence our topic of today, a subject often addressed too late. Some sources estimate that over 1 million abandoned and former mine sites could be scattered globally, and arguably, many of these sites have not been adequately relinquished. In other words, they need ongoing management. The state of these sites may vary enormously, with some well managed post-closure by mining companies, while others have been abandoned, presenting long-term and latent risks to the environment, people, and communities. So traditional mine closure practices tends to consider rehabilitation post-mining operations, i.e., we start rehabilitating after we've finished mining. Equally, returning the land to its pre-mining conditions is the best practice. We do, however, need to challenge these two ways of thinking. There are several reasons for this. Firstly, building rehabilitation into mining operations is cheaper and more effective, and I'll come back to that. Secondly, over the many decades of a mine's operations, society and the environment around the mine evolve, and plans for post-mining land use, often treated as though carved in stone, are also likely in need of change. The challenge within this context of change, it is clear that there are a multiplicity of challenges in uprooting the traditional approaches, and no company, whether in the mining sector or elsewhere, is an expert in all aspects of what is needed. However, I believe there are a few aspects we can begin with towards developing a new approach to post-mine land usage and restoration. Firstly, we must ensure we align our approach with societal expectations and, where possible, co-create solutions. Secondly, we have to move from the concept of land use, i.e., what is the land used for, to the ideal of land capability. What opportunities could the land present for people and communities? Thirdly, we have to shift our thinking from the local to a regional lens, recognizing the interconnectivity of many social and economic issues not bound by geography. And fourthly, we must move from addressing individual objectives and tasks to systems-wide interventions that drive sustainable impact and thriving livelihoods. With this in mind, we should aim to create post-production, self-sustaining ecosystems through embedded regenerative solutions into planning of the mines. And one may ask, well, what is regenerative approach in this context? Fundamentally, it is a mindset shift, looking at every decision through a full impact decision-making lens and embracing systems thinking. It is about transforming future liabilities and risks into opportunities through, for example, a completely different approach to the use and treatment of waste, both mineral and non-mineral. It also means embedding a partnership approach into the mine site planning, backing the needs of society into the DNA of operations. And what might this look like? Well, spare a moment and imagine a mine that, while still in production, has a waste rock recycling and land formation process which creates excellent agricultural land and mineral fertilizers for farmers. Alongside this, an aquacultural process developed by local people upskilled in aquaculture, used to treat legacy wastewater, and developed a sustainable industry. Imagine a mine whose renewable energy is integrated into the broader regional ecosystem and co-owned with the regional government, supporting reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy to communities even beyond the life of mine. Imagine a water management system for a mine designed to create sustainable ecosystems for indigenous species and, together with the community, a forestry reserve providing a carbon sink and a source of funding through monetizing carbon offsets. There are many other possibilities, but these are just a snapshot. In conclusion, the crucial shift for our industry is to move from a mindset of trying only to relinquish asset post-production to one where we are aiming to be part of a process of diversifying an economy around our operations to deliver self-sustaining post-mining land uses, even if it takes some time to do. And this is the commitment as Anglo American that we make through our operations in truly living our purpose of reimagining mining to improve people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Themba, for those inspiring words. As I was listening to him about transitioning into a landscape approach and integrating a post-mine landscape into the local community livelihood, I was reminded of a recent visit which we undertook to a mine in Germany. It's an old, it's an existing coal mine, started in 1978, will go on till 2035. They actually have a mine closure plan, which actually is being worked into now. So they have close to 10,000 hectares of forest redone, agriculture re-established, and they are creating this huge lake and a tourism information center and so on and so forth. So it is actually possible if you plan in advance, because then you can earmark the money and keep work on the expertise. And this is an ideal time to turn to Robbie and talk about the sustainable solutions in a mining context. Robbie is the founder and managing director of OMA Solutions Private Limited, who provides expert advice to Ivanhoe Mines in respect to sustainability and how to turn mine restoration into strategic economic opportunities. She's a focused and committed professional with 20 years of experience in project management for an array of environmental projects in the mining. So you actually essentially support mining industry. So you have the floor now. Would you like to speak from here? Absolutely. It's a very nice spot. We also have our beautiful logo.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm representing Ivanhoe today, and my topic is really important, and it's something that I really want, before we start talking about it, I want you guys to think about something. I want you to think about your families at home. So just for a moment, think about your mom, think about your dad, think about your children, or your brothers, or your sisters. Now, think about what do they need to be in a happy place, psychologically or physically. What's important for us as Ivanhoe was to really practically think about how were we going to get restoration and biodiversity net gain right on the ground. And we realized the only way we were going to do that is to work with the community and to really understand what they need from a well-being perspective. Think about if you are in a good space, how much more can you give back? So we looked at why. Why were we losing biodiversity? What were the causes for us to have such a big increase in loss in biodiversity in close proximity to our mining houses? The biggest reason was influx. We had people coming towards the mine for opportunities. So if you had small communities or you had 1 or 2 villages, now you have 42 villages. You have 42 villages with several or dozens of different types of needs. And the most important secret for us was to have this collaboration with that community, meeting them on a monthly basis, on biannual basis, but to determine how are we going to do livelihood restoration that was going to give back to the community as well as achieve the closure objective for the mine. The livelihood projects that Ivanhoe have rolled out included poultry farms, aquaponics, fish ponds, brick cementing, sewing operations. But what we realized is that we weren't integrating that with biodiversity restoration. So we took it a step further and we brought the community into restoration, teaching them how to propagate plants, teaching them how to run nurseries, teaching them about the different habitat types that were in close proximity to them, giving them alternative options not to burn or not to poach or not to use the ecosystem services that they were so used to using, but to have an alternative option. What's really important from a biodiversity perspective is to have the buy-in from communities. If you don't have their buy-in and you don't understand their needs, you're not going to be able to achieve your end objective. And what Themba was saying, we really need to proactively start looking at how to integrate those communities into our plans, and we need to do that integration with them. So we need to make them feel heard. We need to make them feel that they are able to stay once the mine is gone. And we need to give them skills that is going to give them the ability to have a long-lasting, sustainable impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Robin is essentially talking about the importance of the communities and how do we integrate them, but also at an early stage. In Germany, the mine I was talking about, in the early stage, actually, there's a resistance to that mining activity, which is typical in many countries. But eventually, when they see that entire area transitioning into almost a new economy, while mining is still ongoing, suddenly the communities start to see a lot of benefit in that, because of course the community benefit primarily from the royalty which is gained, etc. Absolutely critical. So I now want to turn to our third speaker, Dr. Renee Young, whom I had the pleasure of knowing for last 1 year, and we have been working together. He's a program director, conservation and restoration at the Western Australian Biodiversity Science Institute. She is an experienced manager and environmental scientist, specializing in ecological restoration, with recent projects showcased at the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26 as well, and the UN Biodiversity Conference. That's where we met, in Montreal. That's correct. Working with the government, industry, and research, Renee collaborates widely to ensure outputs are applied and readily implementable. Renee has been instrumental in the new mining restoration standard from the Society for Ecological Restoration, which we promote in each of our training. Recently, we concluded a training in Western Australia, where they took us to actual field locations to showcase mining activities. Renee, you have the floor.
Were not in their territories until 1998. They are not allowed to be there anymore. So communication is basically telling the truth, telling the story about our side.
Thank you, Murali. Thank you very much for the opportunity to stand here today and talk to you about mine site restoration here at COP28 in Dubai. And it's a real privilege to stand alongside these esteemed panelists with me. And it's so enlightening to hear positive stories coming out of the mining industry. A lot of the time it can be doom and gloom when we're talking about mining, and we really need to highlight, I think, when we're able to achieve positive outcomes, and then how we can promote that and extend that beyond isolated cases. So as Murali said, I'm Dr. Renee Young. I'm from the West Australian Biodiversity Science Institute, and I'm also an SER Global Ambassador for Ecological Restoration. I've been working in mining for a number of years now as a consultant, and then managing research projects and sort of accumulating in my role now at WOBSE, which works with government, industry and researchers to really tackle the complex biodiversity challenges the state faces. And Western Australia is a mining heavy state, so I do a lot of work with the mining industry. I want to talk a little bit also about some case studies that are happening in Western Australia that I think we can learn from. But before we do that, I want to take a step back and touch on some points Themda made as well around what's the current status of the global mining industry at the moment. And the reality is that we're rapidly trying to transition to net zero, and we need to do that at an alarming rate. We're going to have a whole plethora of technologies that are going to be combined for us to be able to achieve that target. But the reality is that a lot of these technologies are actually very mineral and metal intensive. So if we look at just a couple of examples, EVs, for example, take about 5 times the amount of minerals and metals to produce an EV than a conventional car. We see similar proportions when we're talking about offshore wind versus conventional coal. And this isn't to deter the transition of those technologies, not at all, but it's to provide a really upfront and frank conversation around we're going to need a lot more mines and we're going to need them soon. So minerals such as graphite, cobalt, lithium, we're going to need to see at least a 500% increase than current capacity for extraction to support those transitions by 2050. At the same time as scaling up, we're also going to see rapid mine closure as well. So over the next 25 years, we expect to see at least 50% of the world's current operating mines close. And as Themda highlighted, we've also got this third issue around abandoned mines, with now over 1 million abandoned mines scattered across the globe. So it's a really complex space that we're working in. And in thinking about this with several of my colleagues over the previous years, we really identified that there was a gap in our understanding around how to do best practice mine site restoration specifically. We've got really good guidance around mine closure and mine closure processes, and we've got really good guidance around ecological restoration, but what was missing was how do we do best practice for mine site restoration. And the reason why that gap was so significant is because when we're doing restoration in these systems, we're dealing with vastly altered geological profiles and vast waste landforms as well. So we really need to understand the dynamics of those systems to understand what we can put back and how we can maximise our environmental return to those sites. Recently, as Murali mentioned, we launched the international standards for mine site restoration at COP15 in Montreal. And as you will know, at COP15 we saw the signing of the landmark Global Biodiversity Framework, and within that framework we've seen several mechanisms for companies to start to disclose and report their impacts on nature. If mining companies are going to shift towards nature positive, we really need to think about, well, how are we going to do that in these really complex systems? And there's a number of ways in which they can progress that. We need to reconsider where mining occurs and prioritise areas that are already degraded or have been converted. And we need to avoid those areas that have high ecological or cultural significance that we can't replace. We need to minimise the recovery gap to the extent possible and make sure we're doing best practice ecological restoration in these systems. And we need to take off-site environmental ecological recovery in those legacy sites and surrounding degraded landscapes. And the fourth one that I wanted to highlight as well has really come about since COP15 and the final release of the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures is appropriate data capture and reporting on those impacts so we can measure our change effectively. And that's going to be really important if we're going to shift the industry at a global scale. So I wanted to now pivot a little bit towards some on-ground case studies, and in thinking about TNFD and disclosing on nature, one of the projects that we had in Western Australia presented a really great opportunity for us. It's a site called Beenup. Beenup is located in the Southwest Biodiversity Hotspot. It was a mineral sands mine, and there was quite a lot of impact when that mine went in. About 660 hectares were cleared to a depth of 55 metres, was extracted, and there was a lot of technologies to prevent acid soils forming. What happened was the mine was operational for a couple of years, but it turned out that the resource was not viable. There was some technical issues around extracting of the resource. So it was closed, and the company, it was a BHP site, went in and did ecological restoration very quickly. And they employed best practice ecological restoration and returned a whole series of interconnected wetlands with surrounding vegetation that mimics the surrounding environment. So that the mine closed in about 1999, and so now the restoration sites are about 20 years old. And that presented a really great opportunity because they had encompassed and adopted very good data capture for that site. We were able to produce natural capital accounts for the site pre-mining, immediately post-mining, and following ecological restoration. And I believe that's one of the world's first times that that's actually been able to be produced. And what we were able to do at that site in particular is track how the natural capital of the site varied over time. One of the things that BHP did at that site was also move beyond the direct footprint of the current mine and undertake ecological restoration in surrounding landscapes and targeting additional areas where there was threatened ecological communities and return that back to the conservation estate. So through the data capture and the generation of the accounts that were largely undertaken by CSIRO and Syrinx Environmental in Western Australia and advised by a whole range of technical advisors, of which I was one, we were able to demonstrate in that particular case, we were able to show how you can get to nature positive. Now, not all mining is going to show the same picture, and in a vast number of cases, we probably won't be achieving nature positive. However, it's a really good example of the fact that we can do this, we can create nature positive landscapes, and we now have the technologies and the abilities to be able to report and disclose those, to be able, so shareholders and the wider community can then associate those with the company, and it can influence social licence to operate. So I think we've got a really important tool that's being developed, and hopefully something that will shift ecological restoration and improve outcomes across the industry and globally as well. I'm going to finish there and look forward to a discussion.
Thank you, Renee, for those interesting observations. Now, we are going to open up for discussions, and as the audience is getting ready, may I ask Mr. Themba about, in the road to restoration, what is the biggest pressure on the industry? Is it new legislations coming? Is it peer pressure? Is it from inside the organization itself? Because young people who want to work for organization want to work for more environmentally sustainable organization. Are there financial incentive? What exactly is your main incentive or pressure to do restoration?
Thank you. Thank you, Doc. I would say it's quite a myriad of challenges, but more opportunities. Because, from a legislation perspective, the bulk of that is through the application of the various permitting and mineral rights. When it becomes a challenge is obviously when you are already in train and there are proposed changes to legislation, which obviously then starts to impact on the cost base. There's obviously a challenge as well around materials. So one of the biggest challenges in restoration is the availability of topsoil, because that is key and fundamental. And that really talks to, as well, as we uncover where we mine, how we store and how we preserve that topsoil. Also in the context of potential needs from the communities. Clearly, the other challenge would be the water treatment, particularly when you've gone through quite a number of steps where you've had to dewater what it is that you are mining, and in some cases where you have to treat those water systems. And of course, the opportunity there is to drive for these passive water treatment systems, because we believe that they are more effective than the inorganic approaches. And then the other one, of course, is how we work with our host communities and our local communities in relation to the way forward, particularly when we think about this new way of doing things, as opposed to waiting until the end, but rather starting at the beginning. And I think the challenge is that sometimes when we look at our host communities, we tend to think that they are a homogeneous group, and they are not, because they're very different representations. There's the youth, there's the elderly, there are entrepreneurs and business people, there are also politicians, but there are also tribal authorities. And coming up with a way forward where you have alignment with the communities, but also local and provincial government is also a challenge. So those are some of the challenges, Dr. Morali. But I would say, though, that in many instances, though, despite some of those challenges, it hasn't stopped us from having some real success stories in terms of restoration.
Thank you. Actually, I was visiting one of the abandoned mines they were trying to restore, and they mentioned about the challenge of the topsoil. And they said they now have an agreement with a sweet potato harvesting unit that when you wash the sweet potato, whatever topsoil they get is given to the mining industry. So, and they, so they have some sort of a symbiotic arrangement. And I was thinking, maybe in Africa, for example, they have this large cassava or yam, farms, where you grab, and of course the topsoil is then, washed away into some river, and one could think of this. I never imagined topsoil could be such an important challenge on that. I want to come to Robbie and ask about the whole idea of, you are a consultant in a way to the mining sector. In the G20 Global Land Initiative, we have been promoting this idea of restoration as a land of opportunities, that there is money to be made from restoration. And we are launching tomorrow an agreement with the International Trade Center to train 10,000 young people to start up restoration industry. Now, of course, we talk about this passionately, but I want to ask you, from seeing from the ground, maybe trying to do the business, do you really see that business sector opening up? We are almost saying a restoration industry is about to emerge. What is your feeling about it?
Thank you, Doctor. I would actually like to add on to a couple of things that Themba said. And there are a couple of words: innovation, research, powerful solutions with gentle delivery. We've been able to accomplish plant growth on tailings material with zero topsoil. What we do is we actually harvest resources in close proximity to those tailings areas. We use that material, turn it into biochar, and we change the bulk density of tailings material with zero topsoil. Another really important component on what Themba said is that with this change in climate and with restoration that we have to deal with, it's not textbook. We have to think about the environment we're receiving. So we need to change our thought process. We need to plant in winter and not summer. So if you take, or not spring, if you take planting seeds in tailings where you haven't had that bulk density or that composition of tailings turn into a medium that you can get plant growth, you plant just before winter, you allow the plants to grow, they die. And you're changing the tailings material organically. So over time, you actually start to have a seed bed that is actually linked to that habitat type, and you're starting to get the habitat that was once there grow on tailings material. So you don't have to truck in these huge amounts of topsoil. But on your question, because restoration should actually not be looked at from a textbook perspective, but more from a powerful solution perspective, you can take young people and young entrepreneurs and try different things. But you need to remember to do this with your community. So you need to have something that's powerful but gentle. So you pull in your community, you bring in these young entrepreneurs, and you start to do different things, even if it's just changing a season. But it really is something amazing of the successes that we've had both in platinum tails, in gold tails, in chrome tails, just by changing the bulk density. So you could have these massive facilities that if you are actually harvesting, using, or locking up contaminants through biochar, you actually have available topsoil.
Thank you. Renee, as I was mentioning, we have online audience as well. And one of the questions the online audience is asking is a young person, how do you become a restoration expert? So you are coming from one of the university. Do you have a course on restoration? Do you have bachelor's degree? How exactly one becomes a restoration expert?
I don't think that there's one clear path, but there are courses in universities now, particular units and pathways you can take that train you, and there are units essentially in restoration ecology. We're seeing those come more and more pop up across the globe, and as we see ESG becoming more and more important, that they're more readily available. But I don't think direct education through higher education is the only pathway. I think that's a core skill. You need to do that to get the underlying foundation, but it's about getting on-ground experience and varied experience. I think if I just sort of think back to my pathway, I did a PhD in seed ecology, so I can talk a lot about topsoil as well, if you want to go back to that, and some thoughts on that. But it felt like I was getting specialised very quickly. So I went out and was an environmental consultant, which enabled me to work over the entire state of Western Australia, which is huge and exposed to a whole range of systems. That builds understanding of different ecosystems and different processes and different industries. And I think you really need that holistic sort of thinking to then be able to refine down. And there's going to be no shortage in jobs in ecological restoration going forward. So I think whether you move into consulting, into mining industries, into academia and research or other avenues as well, there's going to be multiple pathways out there. I just think spread your wings, get a broad understanding, find what you're good at and what you're passionate about, and then direct your efforts there.
Thank you very much. I was looking at the latest World Economic Forum report on artificial intelligence and the future of employment. And it actually said the environmental industry is the one which is not going to be affected as much as it's in the accounting or other sectors. So restoration is the future job trajectory. So now I want to open to the floor. And if you have any questions you want to raise to the panel, please feel free. Yes, Ashwina. Yes, yeah, it's a right.
Hi, Hi, good afternoon. So my question is to Mr. Temba. So I would really like to know how can big organizations such as the Anglo-American support small-scale and artisan miners to improve their environmental performance?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so we belong to an industry association called the ICMMM, which has gone through what I would call a wonderful journey of actually realizing that, whilst our past legacy might have been challenged, we need to basically present a different posture in terms of going forward. And some of this obviously is around the work we do with artisanal mining and the subject around artisanal mining. But more importantly, our view and perspective around, the built environment and how we contribute to that. So for me, that is one way in terms of how we engage with the smaller scale miners. Now, the ICMMM is basically a global organization. Regionally, within the various geographical jurisdictions, in most countries, you also have mining associations. So, for example, I can speak on behalf of South Africa, where we have the Minerals Council of South Africa. Australia has something similar. And again, what we've been doing within the Mineral Council of South Africa is also having open up to membership of the smaller scale miners to be part and parcel, because one of the reasons we do that is because, there are 6,000 mining companies out there, and about 100 typically are in the formal mining sector. When things go horribly wrong in mining, it tends to be the tail of the 6,000. So therefore, if we can have more and more that are actively participating in this, then we ensure then that the reputation of the industry, is not tarnished, and we're able to move forward in terms of the differences that we make. So we have those platforms. And then, of course, within the industry, whether it's the coal or whether it's the PGMs, they also have specific sector formations that are able to assist. So that's just an example of some of the things.
Thank you very much. I think it's working through the platform is the right thing. Yes.
Hello, good afternoon. I have a question towards you. So you've been mentioning the significance of community. So what is the best point to start to talk to the community about post-mine restoration? Is it at the point of the mine closure plan, or probably at the time of starting new mines? What is your experience?
It's really important to start speaking to them in prospecting. So before you even start a mine, to start engaging with them. It's also really important to understand their community protocols. So if you're working with the Zulu community, or if you're working with the Congolese community, you're going to get the best traction if you follow their protocols and you communicate in a way that they feel comfortable to be communicated. It's also really important to communicate with communities understanding their religion, because we've worked in Afghanistan where the women won't speak if the men are in the room. So you've actually got to then have different meetings. You've got to have meetings with the older women, with the younger women, with the older men, with the younger men, because they have different needs. So you actually need to really engage and spend time with them, but definitely not during and after. Right in the beginning, before you start, you need to find out what their needs are.
Thank you. Thank you, Robbie. I was reminded of a community.
Sorry, can I just jump in?
You wanted to add something?
Just wanted to add, certainly before the mine is started, to have that engagement, but then ongoing as well throughout the life of mine. Life of mines might be 2 decades, 5 decades, 10 decades. You need to establish protocols and points of going back to the community, checking what you have agreed upon, see if positions are changing, and maintain that throughout life of mine. A lot of the time you might get it before mining, but then during operations I think it drops off a lot, a lot of the time, and then it might pick up again when we actually need to close the mine. So it's important to do that throughout life of mine.
Also, something that Temba said, it's not a bonus. So as you're going to start, what their needs might be very different to during. So when you're consulting during, it might change, and at the end it'll change as well. So you've got to start understanding the influx and where are these people coming from and how their culture is influencing how people feel and what they need.
Thank you. I think it's a very important point that it's not a one-off consultation. It's an ongoing, multi-sectoral, and culturally sensitive. Please, yeah.
I would love to hear a little bit about your kind of ideas of who the responsibility falls on, like if it's on the private sector companies to follow up and where the funding comes from, especially for the mines that already exist, like the ones for our cell phones. Like, should Apple be contributing X amount of money to closing a mine in Congo, and how kind of those processes take place as well?
Yes, I think it's a very interesting question about the life cycle responsibility. Tempa, do you want to start, and then maybe I can ask others too?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the sovereign governments are obviously responsible for what happens on the land. And that is why there are extremely rigorous environmental impact assessment processes that we go through. And in certain instances as well, that requires the approval of civil society and the host communities, such as in countries such as Brazil, because it's really about how we hold accountable, those that obviously are involved in disturbing the land that we mine. And clearly, part of that as well is the requirement to put aside funds through trusts to actually pay for, the rehabilitation. And clearly through the life cycle of the life of mine, through the government, through the Department of Environmental Affairs and Minerals and Energy, based on whatever jurisdiction we operate under, we have ongoing assessments and targets that need to be met. So clearly, operator and government are responsible for that. There obviously comes an inflection point where you are 5 years away from mine closure, and this is in the old approach I'm referring to, where clearly, government needs to start taking more and more of a responsibility to ensure that the commitments are made and access to those funds is actually made available. You talked about the end users, and you talked about the role that they play. I suppose the role that the consumers and the end users play is that it's very clear for us as the mining companies that given the rise of this concept of provenance and traceability, the way we operate and the way we have minimal impact on the environment also leads to whether the end consumers will buy the products that are derived from our raw materials. So in that way, you could say indirectly, they are holding us to account.
Thank you. I think that is a very interesting question about the life cycle aspect. Yes, please, you can.
Hello, everyone. I would like to ask Dr. Renee, what would be a good way of rewarding companies who do mine closure, meeting ecological restoration standards?
Fantastic question. Thank you very much. Look, I think for mining companies to really lift the bar and make sure that they're adopting and bringing in standards is you need to make sure we've got the right resourcing internally, which means building capability inside companies that can really advise on key principles and practices to achieve best practice ecological restoration. Obviously, we published the international standards, principles and standards for the restoration and recovery of mine sites last year. That's not a legally binding framework, but it's a voluntary framework that companies can adopt to make sure that they're thinking about how to holistically improve environmental performance. So my recommendation would be go to the international standards for ecological restoration and mine site restoration specifically to improve performance, but engage more broadly in ecological restoration and current communities of practice that are out there. Society for Ecological Restoration is a fantastic resource that has networks of people that enable you to connect. So you need to build a community internally, I think, and then and recognise that ESG is a significant risk to mining companies now, and it's core business. So it has to be done well. So lean on their experts that can advise.
Thank you. The Society for Ecological Restoration is close to 10,000 professionals now, I think.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Hi, thanks for your insights. We work with startups which focus on nature. Are there any clear challenges specifically around knowledge gaps or technological gaps that innovators can work on when it comes to mine restoration?
Maybe we'll ask Robbie do you want to take it?
I think when it comes to young entrepreneurs, it's really important to understand their language barrier. So when we're working in different countries, we're actually really working with people that have the answers, but they're not always able to communicate with us, and we're not always able to communicate with them. And sometimes it's either medicinal solutions or it's solutions that have come through their families on how to do certain types of restoration, but now we're not taking that extra effort to have a translator with us all the time or to really understand the language barrier. So as scientists, a lot of us understand plant species with Latin words, and I can tell you now, if I meet a scientist in Africa, we sometimes will speak Latin just because we know what each other is saying, and then we get really excited about it. So I think taking the time to understand where the language barrier is, closing that first, and then understanding where they're struggling. So are they struggling with internet, with Wi-Fi? A lot of times we work in places where we will offer them apps or how to communicate with us, but they don't even have Wi-Fi. So then you've got to understand protocols on how to actually get to them to understand the question they're asking so you can come back and answer that question. Sometimes it's basic skills, how to put irrigation piping down when you've just done a vegetable garden or when you're now doing irrigation on a side slope. So it's, yes, number one, close the language barrier and understand their needs for their day. Are they hungry? Do they need water? What are their needs for that day? That's something else we forget because we fly in and we've got everything sorted and we're all good to go. But sometimes I'm talking to someone that just by giving them an orange and sitting down with them, I get a lot more because they can see that I see them and I really want to help, and then we start to move forward.
Thank you. No, the language gap is absolutely important because unlike many other professions in the post-COVID world, mine restoration cannot be work from home. It still has to be worked where the mine is, and it cannot be done remotely. Yes.
Hello, my question goes to Themba, and I was just wondering, what role do you see for young people in the mining sector, and especially since we're moving to a more sustainable mining sector, and yeah, how best can young people contribute to it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, if you just consider the fact that the pathway to a low-carbon future requires probably 6 times more the minerals and metals that we currently mine and process and produce, you can clearly see that there's a role that young people can play through that, through the various professions. Not just the technical professions, but also the social scientists type of professions. because, you know, we certainly believe that it has to be done in a way that is in harmony with obviously society and also the environment, and in a way that it creates enduring value. And you know, what I love about young people is the creativity, is the fact that they disrupt the way in which we do things, and their grasp for technology and always simplifying what it is that we do. So there's a massive role. And ultimately, I mean, the young people are going to be the beneficiaries of what my generation and our generation, those of us that are Gen X, that we leave behind. So they will be the future custodians, you know, of these assets. And I think having that buy-in right now is quite key. So it's a broad, very, very broad question, but there's a massive role that the youngsters can play. And again, not just from, you know, being involved in the mining companies, but also in the institutions, in NGOs, in civil society, and in government as well, because we all need to keep each other honest as we go through this journey.
Thank you, Themba. Because it's such a tight schedule for everybody, we will have to close. Did you want to say last word?
I just wanted to add,
Yes.
Just thinking on how young people engage and get the foot in the door, and also building on some of the other things around education that we've spoken about. I think one of the first things that everybody can do, whether you're young or middle-aged or later in your career, is engage, as we said, engage with SCR, but particularly the Certified Environmental Restoration Practitioners course, which gives you a accreditation that you can undertake ecological restoration. And I think if you want to get your foot into the door into mining companies, having that qualification behind you is something that everybody can do, and really sets the foundation for good knowledge going forward that can infiltrate the company.
Thank you, Renee. I want to now thank all the speakers, Themba, Robbie, and Renee, for traveling all the way to be here. I know it's I think it's the last 1 kilometer is the hardest, I think. You know, coming from Australia is okay, but, you know, getting from the metro station to this building is the hardest. But I want to thank you all for taking that extra mile to be here. I want to thank the audience and also online. I know a couple of you wanted to ask questions but could not get time, but please continue to engage with us. All details are on the QR code. Maybe you can show that, and we'll continue to have. And I want to give a big hand to the colleagues and